In today's Right to Reason, I am going to tell you why you should be a socialist.
We'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover, for really showing us the way. We'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover. You made us what we are today.
In 1976, the popular Annie musical portrayed the reality of shantytowns built by the homeless known as Hoovervilles. The play was actually based on a Harold Gray's Little Orphan Annie from the 20s, but it's the 20s and 30s that I want to talk to you about today, specifically 1929 to 1939, the era known as the Great Depression. Despite what many economists may argue about, the Great Depression did not have one cause. Hoover, for example, was blamed by the populace, while he blamed World War I. Both arguments have their own legitimate points, but we'll focus on the economics of the time and let you draw your own conclusions. First off, banks were small individual institutions that couldn't handle the massive unemployment and constant drop of farm prices. In response, the Fed began raising rates and continued raising them even after the Depression had begun. Hoover didn't do much to reverse this crumbling system because he was passionately invested in this idea that government shouldn't be involved in the country's economy, that the invisible hand would kind of clean up everything for us. Might sound familiar. That's the libertarian and conservative viewpoint that you'll hear today. But I digress. Let me get back to my point here. That's when the dominoes began to fall. The feds keep raising the rates. Everyone goes into bankruptcy. They start losing their homes. Investors pull their money from the bank. Banks fold. This causes panic. Because of the panic, people stop putting their money in the banks, therefore decreasing the money supply, and everybody's screwed. To explain it from a philosophical point of view, here's everybody's favorite Zen master, Alan Watts.
This was the situation of the Great Depression, when here we were still, in a material sense, a very rich country, with plenty of fields and farms and mines and factories, everything going. But suddenly, because of a psychological hang-up, because of a mysterious mumbo-jumbo about the economy, about the banking, we were all miserable and poor, starving in the midst of plenty, just because of a psychological hang-up. And that hang-up is that money is real, and that people ought to suffer in order to get it. But the whole point of the machine is to relieve you of that suffering. It is an ingenuity. You see, we are psychologically back in the 17th century, and technically in the 20th.
Then, something awesome happened. In 1932, the country elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He immediately drops the New Deal on the country, creating 42 new agencies, job creation, unionization, unemployed insurance, Social Security, the SEC. He even gave all the banks those cute little gold placards that say FDIC insured, because you need those. Socialism saved your country. Now, many anti-socialists would tell you the exact opposite from what you'll find in every macroeconomics textbook in every college around America, that the war, specifically World War II, saved us from the Great Depression instead of President Frankie. This is common propaganda from the powers that be trying to convince you that killing one another is going to make you richer. Take a look at this graph.
Look at this graph!
Here you can clearly see the economy was improving long before World War II. However, the rest of the world blowing itself up while we sat on the other side of the Atlantic did improve our trade industry quite a bit, as you might expect. So you have to give the warmongers a point there, although once we entered the war, we increased our national debt by about $100 billion, so we'll just take that point right back. Now, rather than saying World War II saved us from the Great Depression, it'd be a clearer understanding of history to say the Great Depression actually caused World War II. The financial stress of the Depression in Europe led the Germans to elect someone saying he's going to make their country great again by making great deals and getting rid of people based on race. Sound familiar? So then, what is socialism? Here is an interview between Bill Maher and Bernie Sanders that might help explain this concept.
We have to we have to teach Americans what this is.
We do.
And I don't know if we're doing that yet.
Okay.
I don't think most Americans realize they're already socialists.
In certain respects. Okay. Let's start off with what it is not what we want to change. We want to deal with the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in America. Very few people think it is acceptable or moral that the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. that we have seen a proliferate.
But see, Bernie, you always say that, and I think even the Republicans are not for income inequality. They hear that, but it doesn't compute that that's going to be solved by socialism. Socialism is the programs they already like. They like Social Security. That's socialism. They like Medicare. They like the VA. They like the military.
No, that's exactly right.
It's already a socialist country.
But what we have to, no, it's not a socialist country.
It's quasi.
Quasi. There are some socialist programs. But what we have got to do is remind fellow Americans that every other major country on earth guarantees health care to all people as a right, and they do it more cost effectively than we do. We have got to inform the American people that we are the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee paid family and medical leave. We have got to remind the American people that there's something a little bit crazy when in America we have more people in jail, disproportionately people of color, than any other major country on earth.
All right.
So here's another way of looking at it. And I got to warn you, Chomsky's a little dry, but bear with him because this is important.
This is deeply ingrained in people's understanding and consciousness and barely below the surface. In fact, it's a call for essentially extension of democracy to the industrial sphere and to communities as well. We should also bear in mind that the leading American social philosopher, John Dewey, who's as mainstream as apple pie, his main work was concentrated on democracy. He pointed out over and over again that as long as we have what he called industrial feudalism, that is a tyrannical control, private power controlling production commerce, democracy will be very limited. We have to move to what he called industrial democracy if we hope to have significant democracy. As for politics, his position was that until that happens, politics will be the shadow cast over society by big business. And I think most of the population recognizes that and accepts it.
You have been conditioned by banks and corporations lobbying your representatives and controlling your education and the media to believe socialism is synonymous with communism or fascism. Socialism is not a bad word. It's actually a natural result to every modern economic system that exists all around us. Simply put by Marx, socialism is when a population collectively owns and controls the means of production and distributes the end result proportionally. Control of this distribution is usually delegated to the state, which if run democratically allows more people more control over the economy than if you simply left it to the markets, known as laissez-faire. Be careful not to commit the slippery slope fallacy here by thinking that I am proposing pure socialism. Pure socialism would be just as detrimental to society as pure democracy. It was John Winthrop, when referring to pure democracy, who said it to be the worst form of all government. But that doesn't stop us from utilizing the obvious benefits of democracy while we restrain it with something like the Bill of Rights, for example. In the same sense, you must utilize the benefits of socialism, and like Roosevelt, use it to direct the free market. Socialism exists whether you reject it or not. The same socialist strategies that we've been told by the top 1%, the bourgeoisie, not to take advantage of, are being used by the bourgeoisie when they socialize their risk and privatize their profits. Socialism is the progressive result of the liberal concept of the Enlightenment. Your war is not overseas. In fact, just to kind of get off track, name one freedom that's being protected for you in the Middle East right now. Your war is a class war. So to quote Marx's Communist Manifesto, proletarians of all countries, unite. Hey, I hope you found that informative. If you care to hear the rest, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher called The Right to Reason, where we interview super smart people and debate controversial topics. You can also join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, or simply go to our website, therighttoreason.com. Before you go, don't forget to click subscribe below, and remember that you have the right to reason.